My name is Ruth Ann Carter. I'm 61, a retired ER nurse. I know the sound of trouble before it speaks. Last July, my daughter called. "Mom, our ceiling collapsed. Can we stay a bit?" I said yes. 2 suitcases, 1 ring light, and a boyfriend with a laminated smile showed up on my porch. Day 1, he optimized my living room. Day 4, my kitchen. Spices by frequency. Day 6, my photographs vanish for a clean backdrop. He talked like a landlord and looked at my house like content. Then the envelope arrived. Home equity line pre-approval. I hadn't asked for it. That night I heard him whisper in my dining room, "Her safe code is her birthday. It's on a sticky with daisies." I stood still and felt my own walls listen. Morning, I opened the safe, moved the deed, changed the code, and took pictures of everything. Then I went to legal aid. They froze my credit. They taught me to let paper talk louder than fear. I came home with a document of my own. House agreement. No business under my roof. No loans in my name. No filming. No mail. 2-week limit. Sign here or hand me your keys. He laughed. I answered with a locksmith. People think boundaries are cold. Mine were warm as a porch light. That's when the story stopped being about guests and started being about ownership. They arrived like owners. They left without keys. Want to know how we got from "Mom, can we stay?" to "court order granted"? They showed up before sunset with a borrowed ring light, 2 suitcases, a stack of shoeboxes taped together into makeshift drawers, and a smile on Theo that looked laminated. He wore one of those athletic sets you see in videos where a person sits in front of a luxury car and tells you you're not ambitious enough. Haley went around back to let the cat loose from its carrier. It bolted under the couch and stayed there, thumping the wall when it sneezed. Theo set his sneakers on my coffee table like it was a display shelf and spun a slow circle in the living room. "This has a ton of potential," he said, inhaling, as if he might improve the air by owning it. "We could totally optimize the space, air it out." "Air it out," I echoed, setting plates on the dining table and trying to ignore that my wedding photo, the one with Mark's crooked tie and my hair in an updo that took 2 cans of hairspray, had been moved to make room for his ring light. "Dinner's ready." I made meatloaf and green beans and mashed potatoes the way Haley always liked when she was 11 and too tall for her age, but small inside her worry. She used to mash everything together and drown it in ketchup. That night, she took 2 bites and set her fork down like it weighed something. Theo had his phone next to his plate, face up, the screen lighting his grin every time a notification slipped across. "Babe," he said to Haley between bites, "we could film in here if your mom is cool with it. Content about like turning old school houses into modern income stream machines. People love that." I smiled the nurse's smile I used to put on when a resident yelled for a chart I was already holding. Pleasant, unflinching. "Let's start with you putting your phone in your pocket at my table." He laughed, like it was a joke he'd heard at a party. He slid the phone into his pocket. The outline glowed through the pocket fabric like a lighthouse for attention. They were supposed to stay 2 weeks. That's what we said out loud. That's what I repeated to myself when I woke at 3 in the morning and listened to them whisper in the guest room, voices rising and falling like tides. The cat came out the 3rd day and decided my lap existed for its convenience. It planted itself there while I drank coffee and read the local paper and tried to ignore the way Theo made his wants sound like favors I owed him. He reorganized my kitchen on the 4th day. "Your spices are random," he said with delight, as if chaos had delivered itself into his competent hands. We'll do a system, salt and pepper here for reach, all the rest by frequency. We'll put a labeler on your Christmas list. By frequency, he said it like I was a spreadsheet. My photographs disappeared from the wall by day 6. The wedding on the left, Mark's Union watch on its hook in the center, Haley at 5 in a Halloween costume that was supposed to be a sunflower but turned out looking like a fried egg. The nails were still there, bright silver exclamation marks, but the frames had been tucked in the coat closet behind a stack of shoeboxes marked Theo, summer merch. I thought we could do a clean backdrop here. He tapped the blank paint. Eventually a neon sign. People need to feel the brand. I felt a small, hard thing take shape under my breastbone. It wasn't anger. Anger is hot and leaves as fast as it arrives. This thing was cold and came to stay. The first warning came in the mail in an envelope that looked like good news. My name was spelled right. The return address was a downtown bank. The words were cheerful and thanked me for my interest. It said, home equity line pre-approval, and if I had been a woman who moved too fast, I might have skimmed and tossed. But I am the kind of woman who reads everything before she signs her name and who takes pictures of the pages on her phone for her own untrusting files.
I hadn't asked for a HELOC, and I don't talk finances with anyone but my tax preparer, who smells like peppermint patties and asks about my garden. I stood in the kitchen with that letter in my hand and felt like the floor did something farmers might call soft. That night, I woke thirsty around 2 and padded to the kitchen, careful not to step on the cat, who had staked a claim on the rug by the sink. Theo's voice came from the dining room, low and slick, the way water sounds when it slides into places where it shouldn't be. Yeah, he said, her safe code is her birthday, man. She puts it on a sticky note like it's a Hallmark card. The one with the daisies. A laugh. Bro, it's not like I'm stealing. It's consolidation. She keeps paper. No one keeps paper anymore. I didn't breathe. Nurses can hold their breath longer than you'd guess. All the air I had ever watched someone leave their chest, I kept just then and used it to stand still in my own house while a man who did not love me measured whether he could love what I had. The next morning, I went to the safe and stared at the keypad, at the little white sticky note I had written myself when I changed the code after Mark died, because grief makes you forget what you could recite under anesthesia. Daisies in the corner. My birthday in blue ink. I peeled it off and stuck it to the inside of a cookbook while my coffee went cold. The code I entered matched the date on the prescription bottle that held the last pain pills Mark didn't need. The safe opened to the smell of paper and gunmetal. Inside were bonds, a few heirlooms and the deed to the house. I took a photo of the contents with my phone. I put the paper in a manila folder and slid it to the back. Then I shut the safe and changed the code again. I found the sticky note under the trash a day later, the corner smudged like someone had handled it and then thought better of leaving prints. Maybe I'm dramatizing. Maybe it fell. But I am a nurse who learned to trust patterns that aren't accidents. I put that sticky in my spiral notebook under the first entry. Pre-approval letter, 79 Bank. I spelt it like that on purpose in case someone rifled through and decided I couldn't spell. People who want to control you prefer you to be small. Sometimes you let them think you are, for long enough to measure their hands. On day 8, I went to the Franklin County Legal Aid Clinic on Mound Street and sat under a poster that said your rights matter here and breathed air that smelled like toner and too many stories. A paralegal named Luis Delgado made 2 sets of copies of everything I brought and taught me how to freeze my credit. He told me to keep the spiral notebook. He told me to date things and write who said what and to keep my mouth shut until my papers learned how to talk louder than I did. I liked him. He reminded me of my son's best friend from middle school, the one who grew up and married a woman who made tamales that tasted like Christmas. When I got home that afternoon, Theo had spread glossy papers across the kitchen table like a man about to convince you of a miracle that could be yours for 12 easy payments. "This is a simple power of attorney," he said, sliding a pen toward me. "Just in case. I'm good with forms. Let us help you. Air plan stuff. End of life. It's what responsible people do." I poured coffee and leaned my hip against the counter. "Theo," I said, "I spent 30 years being the person who stood next to families when the worst 5 minutes of their lives arrived. I know what end of life looks like. This isn't help. This is control." Haley stepped into the doorway and folded her arms. She looked young. Not the age on her driver's license young, but a kind of teenage I had thought we left behind in 2007 with a scraped knee and a lost soccer game. "Mom," she said, "he's trying to protect you." "I hear that, which is why I went to legal aid this morning and printed something to protect me, too." I laid my stack on the table with my name printed bold on top. House agreement. It stated that my house was not to be used for any business activity, that my safe was mine alone, that my mail was not to be opened by anyone but me, that no loan application would be initiated in my name without my physical presence and signature, that my utility accounts were not to be used, that there was no subletting, that nothing would be filmed without my written consent. It included a move-out date, 2 weeks from that day. There were signature lines for both of them and a line for me that said "received by." He laughed. "You serious?" "Very. And I expect to be taken seriously in my own kitchen." Haley looked at him. I don't know what she hoped he would say. I know what she hoped I would not say. She whispered, "Can we talk about this?" as if I had slammed a door on her hand. "You can talk about it, but the paper doesn't need discussion. It needs signatures, or I need your keys today." He didn't sign. He set the pen down and shook his head like an adult humorously refusing broccoli. "You gonna kick your own kid out?" he asked me, looking at me as if we both understood the performance he wanted from me. "I'm going to protect my roof. It's the only one I've got." That night, I changed the locks. Darlene from across the street came over in her slippers with her 18-year-old grandson, who had opinions about hard work and an electric drill. We worked by the light of her phone and the porch light that buzzed from a bad ballast. "You sure, Ruthie?" she asked when we were done. "As a pulse socks in daylight." I slept well for the first time in 10 days. On the 15th, Theo backed over my lawn edging, loading a rideshare. He called me heartless, loud enough for the driver to hear. The driver did not turn his head. Haley stood on the porch with the cat in a carrier and tears she tried not to let fall because she knew me well enough to know they wouldn't change my mind. I waved from the swing and made a mental note to replace the chain. It groaned like it resented my weight. If you want to rebuild your life after you almost let it be turned into kindling, you start with routines. I joined water aerobics at the Y on Livingston and taught my body the pleasure of moving without urgency. I bought a yellow swim cap and laughed with a woman named Patrice who claimed her backstroke counted as cardio and therapy. I started volunteering at the community garden behind the library, learning when tomatoes prefer to be ignored and when they want you to notice they're ready. Dirt lodged under my nails and wouldn't leave. I learned to like it there, like a reminder that something grows even if you don't give it permission. In September, I drove to the shelter on Alum Creek, where a beagle with a cinnamon face stared at me from a kennel with the dignity of a judge and the nose of a detective. They called him Button because they said he pressed all the good buttons on people. I told the staff I had a porch, a fence, and time. They sent me home with a bag of food, a printed sheet about ear cleaning, and a companion who snored like he had been practicing. I kept the spiral notebook. Every time I found something odd, I wrote it down. The pre-approval letter had a twin that came with a different bank's logo 2 weeks later. I called and told them it wasn't me. I put the date in the notebook and the name of the person who took my call and the reference number. One night, I typed my address into a rental app and found my living room staring back at me with the caption, "Vintage Vibe, weekly stays welcome." I printed the screenshot and took it to legal aid. Louis shook his head like he was disappointed in the state of young men. He taught me how to submit a fraud report to the platform. He taught me how to set up mail holds and destroy them. He wasn't my son, but he asked if I needed someone to look at my porch swing chain, and then he came over with a level on a Saturday like he was my nephew by choice. 3 months to the day after the locks changed, the doorbell rang in the rain. The kind of Ohio rain that decides to be a performance, not just weather. I dried my hands and went to the door and saw my daughter on the porch, hair slicked to her cheeks, Theo on the bottom step with 2 duffels and a look that could scratch paint. The cat wasn't with them. Somewhere in the back of the house, Button barked once, a declaration that he noticed everything. "Mom," Haley said, voice shredded, "can we, just for tonight, can we stay? We'll go in the morning." "No," I said. My own voice surprised me with how steady it was. "Not tonight, not any night." Theo made a sound that wanted to be a laugh and a cough at the same time. "See," he said to Haley, like he wanted her to turn and look at the theater of her choosing me over him. Heartless. I took 1 step forward, enough to smell the nicotine under his cologne. I tried to list my home on a rental site without my consent. I started a loan application with my name. I put a power of attorney across my table like it was a salt shaker. You will not do those things under my roof. My roof is closed. Haley cried. I almost put a hand on her shoulder, but I didn't. Love is not always touch. Sometimes love is standing 6 inches away and letting someone learn to stand in the rain. Across the street, Darlene's porch light clicked on. She didn't come out, not yet, but she was there, a silhouette in a cotton robe and old slippers, a witness. "If you want," I said to Haley and only to her, "I will drive you to the Women's Resource Center myself, or I will call you a ride. I will sit with you while you figure out what you want to do next, but you can't stay here tonight." Theo shook his head and headed down the walk, muttering words that can't be put in a church bulletin. He waved a hand like he was shooing a fly and called over his shoulder that I would regret this. The sound of that duffel thumping into the trunk was the sound of a door closing on a chapter that had been written in disappearing ink. 2 days later, Haley came to the resource center without him. He had driven to Nashville, she said later, to meet a mentor. She sat in a room with posters about domestic violence and bus punch cards, and a woman with kind eyes who led her through a stack of forms. That night, she slept not at my house, but at the church shelter down on Hamilton, the one with the cinder block walls and the volunteers with smiles that reached their eyes. She got a part-time job at the county hospital checking in patients for imaging. She saved $5 at a time like she was collecting seashells after a storm. When she filed for a civil protection order, I sat silently 2 rows back in Department 63 at the Franklin County Courthouse. The courtroom smelled like coffee and dust and anxiety. The judge wore reading glasses that he pushed up on his head when he didn't need them. Theo showed up late in a winter coat that looked like a month's rent and called the judge sir like he was flattering a customer, not addressing a court. Haley read her statement without looking back. Her voice trembled. She kept reading. The judge asked a few questions that made her eyes close for a second each time. He granted the order. Theo's mouth compressed into a line you could file wood with. He left without looking at me. On the way out, we waited for the elevator in a crowd that smelled like old carpet and hope. I passed the cafeteria and bought Haley a chicken noodle soup and a great Powerade, and we ate standing, the way nurses and mothers do when sitting makes your legs remember they're tired.
"I didn't think you'd come," she said, eyes fixed on a spot in the middle distance where the soup steam met the air and made a small cloud. "I said I'd help with the paperwork," I told her. "You're doing the living." She wiped her nose on her paper napkin and laughed once, a short bark that wasn't humor so much as surprise. "I'm sorry," she said. The words were small but heavy. That's a beginning, not an ending. Winter in Reynoldsburg is a lesson in stubbornness. The snow arrives like an apology and then stays just to see if you'll put on boots. Button loved it. He bounded through the drift like someone had put springs in his feet. I put a small water bowl on the porch for the stray cat I suspected decided we were his extended family. Darlene brought over a baker's dozen of ginger cookies and told me her back porch door stuck in the cold, and would I send my grandson over to look at it? Life continued. I said yes to things. Patrice from the Y invited me to her church's coat drive. I brought 3 gently used coats and a stack of hats I had knitted during baseball games Mark used to watch. A retired teacher named Alma recruited me to help sort paperbacks at the library sale. I learned to enjoy the small pleasure of pulling a book out of a pile and seeing a name I loved on the spine. I took Button to Huber Park and sat on the bench by the creek while people tossed frisbees and small kids ran cricket with purpose. One of the dads brought a thermos of hot chocolate that tasted like the promise of better. In the spring, Darlene's son-in-law replaced my porch swing chain with a new one that complained less and held us both steadier. We added a pair of solar lights to the front walk. The daylilies came up on their own because plants do what they do when you leave them alone long enough. In May, I started thrifting with intention, not for me, but because I learned something important about love and boundaries. You can keep your door closed and still prepare for the day you open your hand. At the Habitat Restore on Bryce Road, I found a couch that didn't sag in the middle, a side table the color of toast, 2 lamps with shades that made light softer instead of louder. An older gentleman with the kind of eyebrows that need their own zip code measured the pieces with me and declared they would fit in a nice starter apartment, not too big. I rented a small storage locker off Livingston. The key fob felt like a promise every time I closed my hand around it. Theo called once from a number my phone didn't recognize. It rang twice. I didn't answer. Button barked at the empty air, and then at his reflection in the storm door as if to remind himself he had a duty to patrol. Haley called every 2 weeks. Sometimes she was on her lunch break, shoes squeaking on the hospital linoleum. Sometimes she was on the bus, voice bouncing as the driver braked and the world leaned. Once, she called from a diner off Broad Street at midnight because her shift had flipped and she had a plate of pancakes and wanted me to hear the kindness in the waitress's voice. "Mom," she said one night, close to June, "I dreamed last night that I was standing on a porch, your porch, and it was raining and you handed me a towel out the window." I don't hand towels out windows. I keep them folded in the closet like a person who plans for guests. She laughed. "You know what I mean." "I do," I said. "You're doing fine. You're doing the living." At the community garden potluck, I brought baked mac and cheese the way Mark liked it, with extra sharp cheddar and breadcrumbs that toasted to a color that made you think of state fair corn dogs. Someone set deviled eggs next to my dish and worried the paper plates would fold under the weight. But we had plenty, and no one minded eating with their hands. A Bluetooth speaker made Dolly Parton sound like she'd browed our backyard for a concert. Kids ran with their ice cream cups held out like small trophies. It felt like a town I would choose again if anyone ever let me pick a place to live with a blindfold and a dart. Haley arrived late, hair pulled back, scrub top stained with the evidence of a life lived among people. She brought a plastic bowl of cherry tomatoes and cucumber slices that she had convinced to taste like they belonged together, with a vinaigrette that caught at the back of your throat in a good way.
She stood in the shade of the maple like she was practicing being still. "Hey, Mom," she said. "Hey," I said. We ate standing again. I don't know why that made me feel like we were in a line between the life that was and the life that would be. Maybe it's because so much of caregiving happens that way. On your feet, ready. When the sun settled itself lower in the sky and the kids had found the dessert table twice, I handed her the small silver key fob on a blue elastic. She turned it in her palm and looked at me as if I'd given her a strange coin. "It's not to my house," I said, smiling. "It's to a storage locker. I've been thrifting. Couch, side table, lamps, a rug that doesn't fight with your eyes, a set of dishes that can go in the dishwasher without making you feel guilty. When you sign your lease, it's yours to pick up." Her face crumpled for a second, and then she smoothed it like she had practiced. "I didn't ask you to."
"I know," I said, "and I'm not co-signing anything. I'm not writing checks. I won't be your net. I'll be your cheering section." She laughed, a short sound like a cough that got happier at the end. "I can live with that." We walked Button around the block later, him sniffing the news at the base of every mailbox. At my driveway, she stopped. "I'm afraid of making the same mistake," she said. "You will make mistakes," I said, "but you won't make my mistake. I gave a man the front room of my dignity and let him move my photographs. That won't happen to you, because you know what it looks like now." She stood there, nodding, looking at something past my shoulder. "I'm sorry," she said again. I didn't make a ceremony of it. I just nodded back. Sorry is a key that opens one small door. It doesn't make a mansion. By October, Haley moved into a studio apartment with a window that looked over a line of oaks that would drop leaves on a schedule. She texted me a photo of the couch under one lamp. The rug made a pattern like flowers wanted to be manners. On her second paycheck, she mailed me a money order for $50 and a note that said, "Meal plan on me. Retired nurse deserves takeout." I stuck the note to the fridge with a Columbus Clippers magnet and smiled every time I reached for the creamer. When the holidays came, I did not make a turkey. I made a pot roasting biscuits and green beans and invited Darlene because her son-in-law's family did Thanksgiving on Friday and she didn't like eating alone on the actual day. Haley came late after a short shift. She set a small pumpkin on the table like a present and said she had to leave early because she had an early bus to catch to make it to work. We ate, we told small stories, the kind that make a life without making a point. And when she left, she hugged me longer than she used to. After New Year's, Theo called again. The number popped up as potential spam. I let it go. He left a voicemail I didn't hear because I don't know how to retrieve voicemails on my phone without help. Maybe that's a flaw. Or maybe it's a gift I give myself, the right to hear only what I ask for. The next months were ordinary, and in that ordinary I found comfort I had forgotten. I cleaned the big closet in the hall and filled a box with clothes to take to the thrift store. I took Button to the vet for the ear infection we pretended wasn't happening for 2 weeks. I learned to make banana bread in a way that kept the middle from falling. I went to a pancake breakfast at the firehouse and watched kids climb on the engine and pretend they would never be afraid of anything. In March, Haley called and asked if I was home. 10 minutes later, she pulled into the driveway with a plant she said was a pothos and a face that said she had something to ask. She stood in my living room where my photographs were back on the wall, and she looked at her 10-year-old self in a soccer uniform, and then at the photo of me in my nurse's blues, and then she looked at me. "I have a favor," she said. I waited. "I want to change my emergency contact. Right now, it's still..." She didn't finish the sentence. "Can I put you down? Will you answer when they call?" "Yes, I will answer." She exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for months. "There's one more thing," she said. I'm going to a support group, not for what you think. It's for people who are good at taking care of other people and bad at taking care of themselves. They meet on Tuesdays at the library. They talk about boundaries like they're not a weapon. Would you go with me? Just once? I can go. Just once. And then we'll see. We went. The room was filled with women and a few men who talked about how love had made them do strange things like lie to themselves so they could keep telling the truth to someone else. They talked about guilt as if it was a person who shows up at your door with a casserole and a long memory. I listened. I said my name when they went around the circle, and it felt like introducing myself to myself in a mirror that didn't cheat. One Tuesday after group, we stopped at a diner on Broad Street, the kind with pie under glass and a waitress who calls everybody honey, as if the word has been deeded to her in a will. We split a piece of lemon meringue and watched a couple in the corner argue without raising their voices. My whole life, the ER taught me to listen for what people don't say. The man ran out of words. The woman stacked her napkins like she needed order. "Mom," Haley said, "how did you know? About Theo? About the paper he pushed? About the lines you drew?" I didn't know at first. I just didn't like how my house felt. And I've learned that we are not supposed to be strangers in our own homes. I followed that feeling. Then I got help from someone who knew things I didn't. Then I wrote it down, because paper is stubborn in a way people aren't. She nodded like I handed her a bottle of water on a hot day. The waitress came by with coffee and a smile that had seen worse and better. In late April, an envelope came from the courthouse. It had paperwork about Theo violating the civil protection order with a text that wasn't a direct threat, but wanted to be. I texted Haley a photo of the envelope and told her I was sorry, and she texted back a photo of her pothos plant and said it had grown a new leaf and she was trying to be like that. In May, the community garden held another potluck, this one with a grill and a boy who learned to flip burgers without losing them. I brought corn salad and stood at the edge, where I always stand when crowds confuse my oxygen. A young woman with a baby strapped to her chest asked if she could pet Button. He tolerated it like a saint. The baby drooled on his ears. He didn't mind. We put up a little free pantry at the edge of the garden later that month, and I stocked it with boxes of pasta and jars of sauce and a row of toothbrushes because I remember how many people in the ER told me they hadn't had time to think about one small thing. People use the pantry. Sometimes it was empty in an hour. Sometimes it sat full all day, and I wished for emptiness. Not because I wanted people to need it, but because I wanted to be the kind of neighborhood where people weren't embarrassed to take what they needed. June came, and with it a text from Haley with an address and a photo of keys in her hand. "Lease signed," she wrote. "Starting line, not finish." I met her at the storage locker with a dolly I borrowed from the neighbor who works at a moving company, and an excitement that felt like it overflowed into my shoes. We loaded the couch, the table, the lamps, the rug tied with twine. We drove slowly because joy asks for a careful foot. When we walked into her studio and set the couch against the wall, I had a moment of seeing my daughter at 4 years old building houses out of couch cushions and telling me important stories that had no plots and everything at stake. She stood with her hands on her hips the way I do when I'm about to face down a problem that thinks it's larger than me. "Mom," she said, "you know what I decided? I'm going to put the photos up first, not the TV, the photos." "I support that decision," I said, like a nurse writing an order on a chart. She hung a picture of herself with Mark at a fair, cotton candy staining the corners of both their mouths. She hung one of her at 11, mashing meatloaf and green beans and potatoes into something that any judge would have to call soup. She hung one of me in my nurse's blues, hair tucked back, smile pulled tight because I hadn't learned to let the camera see me. "Do you want to hang any of Theo?" she asked herself out loud, then shook her head and laughed. No, those go in the back of a drawer for a while, maybe forever. We ate takeout on the floor. She told me about a patient who came in angry and left less so, not because she fixed anything, but because she listened. I told her the time I told a resident to sit down and hold a man's hand while he died because there was nothing else to do and his wife was on her way. I said it was better than any medicine we had, that hand holding. She nodded like I had said something brand new, even though I told that story to her 3 times before. Some stories are meant to be told until they stop needing to be. I wish I could tell you that after that our lives stayed steady like a porch that never needs paint. That's not true. In August, Haley called me crying from the bus because she saw Theo on the sidewalk, and he made a gesture he knew would make her feel small. She went to her therapist, and then to the gym, and then to bed early, and I brought groceries the next morning and tucked a little bag of clementines into her fruit bowl like a private note. In September, Button got into a fight with a raccoon, and the vet scolded me gently for letting him out after dark. In October, the dryer broke, and I learned the smell of wet laundry that refuses to dry is a smell I should not ignore. But then it was November, and I was raking the leaves into piles I pretended were corralled, but were not. And Haley pulled into the driveway and stood there like she used to when she got dropped off from 7th grade soccer practice, all knees and elbows and gratitude for the ride. We helped rake. She took the heavy end of the bags without announcing it. We worked in silence like a team. When we took the last bag to the curb, we stood on the porch and looked at the yard and drank lemonade from 2 glasses that used to be jelly jars. The porch swing creaked less than last year. The sun sat in the right place to make the maple leaves look like they were lit from inside. Mom, she said, if I ever get married, don't panic, not now, but someday. Can we do it in a way that doesn't make it feel like I owe anyone anything? Yes, I said. She smiled. That was enough. That question didn't mean forever. It meant hope. A week before Thanksgiving, a letter came from the court again. Theo had moved. The order would follow him if he stayed put long enough to receive it. I placed the letter in the spiral notebook and wrote the date in the word noted. I baked a pumpkin pie and burned the toast under the broiler and laughed at myself for being the kind of woman who could hold a life together and not keep a simple slice of bread from turning black. On Thanksgiving, we ate pot roast and biscuits and green beans again. Darlene told a story about her sister who picked green tomatoes and fried them like the South lives in her hands. Haley brought a cranberry sauce that had oranges in it and explained it was more sophisticated. And then she laughed at herself because who uses the word sophisticated about something you eat with turkey? Button got a piece of biscuit someone dropped and looked around like he was composing a thank you note. When the dishes were done and the sun decided it had done its duty, Haley hugged me and then stepped back. I love you, she said. Loving you used to mean I expected you to save me. Now it means I want to save us both from that. I love you. Loving you used to mean I gave you my house. Now it means I give you my rules.
Porch rules, she said, smiling. Kindness, honesty, no money without paperwork, and everybody uses their own keys. Exactly, I said. That list felt like a prayer I hadn't realized I'd been saying. At Christmas, I put 1 strand of lights around the porch railing and called it festive. I hung a wreath that a neighbor's kid made in art class. Haley brought me a pothos cutting in a mason jar, and we debated names for Button's stocking like it mattered in a courtroom. We settled on writing Button and Good Dog and decided both were true. On New Year's Eve, I fell asleep before midnight like a person who knows that tomorrow is less about the number in your phone and more about the choices in your bones. I dreamed that I was standing on my porch in the rain, and I opened the window and handed a towel to someone who needed it. When I woke, I decided maybe I'd forgotten how to retrieve my voicemails on purpose. In February, my neighbor Alma had a fall in her kitchen. I heard it because I was in the front yard trying to convince the day that it was okay. I called 911 and unlocked my door because I knew the routine. The paramedics who arrived were younger than the men I remembered from my life in Scrubs, but they moved with the same efficiency that told me they had learned what mattered. I stood on Alma's porch and told the first paramedic her allergies and that she doesn't like needles and that she prefers to sit up and drink water before they try to stand her. And he nodded and wrote it down like I had handed him a key. Alma was fine. Hospital overnight, home the next day, a nurse visit for 3 mornings to check blood pressure and dignity. Haley came with me to see her on the 3rd day and brought a plant and a joke about how if we all known plants were medicine, we would have stocked pharmacies with philodendrons. Alma told us we were good girls, and I didn't correct her and say we were good women, because sometimes a word carries love with it, and that's what matters. In April, the community garden announced a seed swap. I brought seeds I had saved and left with seeds that belonged to someone else's story. I planted them and waited. That's all gardening is. Plant and wait and not pretend you control the rain. In May, things grew. In June, I pulled tomatoes warm from the sun and sliced one for lunch and thought about how the word enough is the most generous word I know. Sometime in July, right around the anniversary of the first call that turned my house into a proving ground, I sat on the porch swing with Button at my feet and wrote in my spiral notebook one more line. Porch rules. Keep. Loving with them feels like air. I wrote it so that later, when my memory tries to make things tidy or dramatic, there will be paper to remind me that life is neither of those things. It's a kitchen full of papers you sign or refuse. It's a porch full of people you let in or don't. It's a storage locker full of things you set aside in case you decide to open your hand. Haley came by that afternoon with a bag of groceries and a haircut that made her look like the best version of the kid who used to split the last cookie with me even though she wanted it all. She put the groceries on the counter and took a deep breath. Do you remember the first weekend in this house after Dad died? You made pancakes. I wouldn't eat them. You said, I will not chase you around with a fork. The fork will be on the table when you're ready. I remember. I remember you ate them cold at noon and said they were better that way. They were, she said, smiling. Sometimes I think that's what you did with love. You set it on the table and waited until I was ready. I thought about correcting her to say I hadn't always been that wise. There were years I shoved that metaphorical fork right at her mouth and demanded she open. But a person is allowed to let a grown daughter think she did something smart, if by use or luck she eventually did. We sat on the porch and ate sandwiches and watched a boy learn to ride a bike without training wheels 2 houses down. His dad ran alongside him, one hand floating an inch from the seat, not touching. The boy wobbled, yelled, and then kept going. The dad stopped, hands off, and clapped. That is the job, I said, thinking I said it too quietly for Haley to hear. She heard anyway. That is the job, she repeated, not taking her eyes off the boy flying down the sidewalk, the maples watching like old witnesses.
Summer turned to something like contentment. We had setbacks, a bill that came out of the blue and made the month shrink, a misunderstanding on a Monday that took until Thursday to unwind, a day when I thought I saw Theo at Kroger and my heart did the thing a heart still does when it remembers a threat, but the porch rules worked. We said them like a pledge when we needed to. We wrote them down on a sticky note and stuck them on the inside of a cupboard door. Kindness, honesty, no money without paperwork. Everybody uses their own keys. I would add a 5th sometimes, under my breath. Choose your porch over their storm. In August, I saw a woman in the cereal aisle talking to herself the way you do when you're trying to do math without paper. She looked my age and wore her sadness like a jacket she forgot to take off. She bought bulk cereal and store-brand milk and stared at the price of bananas like she couldn't read without her glasses. I saw myself in 2011, before and after. I didn't say anything. Not then. On my way out, I tucked a Kroger gift card under the donation jar by the customer service counter and hoped it found the right hands. September brought a letter from Haley's landlord that reminded everyone they were raising rent by $30. She absorbed it with a sigh and a plan to walk to work twice a week and save bus money. I wanted to write a check. I didn't. She didn't ask. I sat on my hands and cheered. In October, the maples did what they do. Haley and I raked again, and Darlene brought over cider and sat on my steps and told us about the first time she bought a house and how the door stuck in summer and opened in winter like it was a person with moods. She laughed at herself and at us and at the whole idea that any of us know what we're doing. The sun set the way it does in October, making even small things look like something worth painting. When I think of Theo now, I don't think of the anger that rose in my throat when I found the sticky note under the trash. I don't think of the noise his duffel made when he tossed it into the trunk as if it were my fault that gravity is real. I think of him as a weather system that moved through my life and taught me the value of a roof that doesn't leak and a porch that has rules. I think of him as a cautionary tale I don't tell because my energy is better spent on the stories that make me want to stand up and cook for a room full of women who did hard things today. If I had to put it in one sentence, I would say love without boundaries is a leak you never fix. Love with boundaries is a house that stands through Ohio winters. If I had two sentences, I would say choose your porch and let the world decide whether to knock with respect or keep walking. If I had three, I'd add reply to the calls you want. Let the rest ring out into the maples. I'll end where I started, with the house. It needed paint this whole time. It needs it still. I might get to it next summer, or never. But the porch swing doesn't complain like it used to. The photographs are back on the wall where they belong. My wedding, my nurse's blues, Haley as a fried egg sunflower, plus a new one, taken at the community garden, of me and my daughter standing under a string of paper lanterns, holding plates and laughing at nothing particular. Button sits at my feet in that photo, tongue out, looking like he was written into the world on purpose. The maples are steady. The sky through my kitchen window is the same size as always, but I notice it more. The Kroger still sells day-old sourdough, and the clerk still knows my name. The YMCA pool is 91 degrees on a good day and full of women who call out each other's names when they do something in the water that feels like freedom. The county courthouse holds stories like reservoirs, and sometimes those stories end in a way that lets a woman sleep on a Thursday and wake on a Friday believing she did one thing right. And the porch, my porch, has rules printed in the air by repetition. Kindness, honesty, no money without paperwork, and everybody uses their own keys. People step onto it knowing that. My daughter knows that. I know that. The man who thought he could move my photographs knows that now, too. If you came to my house on a Sunday in late fall, you'd find us here. Me on the swing with a book I may or may not read. Haley on the steps with a mug of tea. Button patrolling the perimeter for squirrels. Darlene walking across the street with cookies wrapped in foil and a story she insists we need to hear. We'll talk about nothing and everything and end up saying something that makes dinner taste better. And when the sun goes down and the air nips and the first stars show up like people who were invited and arrived on time, we'll go inside. We'll lock the door because we live in a world, and we'll leave the porch light on because people we love know how to come home.